Hello, and welcome to the Power of Perspective podcast. I'm Jess Ridout, Head of Data and Digital Consulting. Part of my role includes thinking about our clients' needs and how our consultants need to be ready to meet those. That might be thinking about appropriate courses, how we're going to upskill those consultants, and how to do that as well. So I regularly discuss learning and development needs with the team, considering appropriate courses and other ways to upskill. Those views are relatively short-term and typically reactive, but what does the future look like? What skills might we need in 10 to 15 years' time, and how can we be ready for that? I'm with Jo Lister, Head of Capability Development at BAE Systems Digital Intelligence. Jo has had a varied career in a number of organisations, including TfL and IBM, and has also completed some contracting work. Since joining Digital Intelligence, Jo has had a number of consulting roles and is now responsible for engineering, project management, and consulting capability development, career pathways, and learning and development. Thinking about future skills, definitely within her sweet spot. Jo is passionate about people development, and we regularly have conversations about how to get the best out of people and just have a good natter sometimes. Before we're looking forward to skills of the future, we'll discuss what's the difference between skills and competencies, how can we develop those skills, how do we learn, and how those skills needs have developed. Jo, welcome.
Hi Jess, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me today, Jo. It would be great to start off with a bit of a definition. What is the difference between skills and competencies?
Yeah, it's a really great place to start. I know that we're focusing on skills here today, and I think a really basic definition of a skill is that it's something that you can do and you can do it well. A competency almost takes that a bit broader. So it takes that skill and it applies the context that you can do it in, the behaviours you demonstrate while doing it. And I think when we're chatting today around what skills we need in the future, what's changing in the skills landscape, we're going to say the word skill a lot. But I think a lot of what we're talking about could be either that competency, which has some of those inherent behaviours and experience built in, and some are going to be pure play technical skills. I don't think for what we're talking about today, the difference really matters. I think we can mix and match, but we'll call out some differences where we find them.
Brill. Okay. And what's interesting to me is how both of those have evolved, certainly since I started my career. And we will, as you said, we'll kind of blend between the two about skills and competencies. But given that we started our skills and tech learning and career journeys around a similar sort of time, how and what skills do you think have changed since we left university or left our kind of formal training to what we're doing now in our professional years?
Again, it's been really interesting. I know that we've laughed about a lot of the courses that we went on when we were babies fresh out of uni, and I know that you were talking about some of the technical skills that you were learning. I learned assembly language back in the day. It will probably surprise you not that I have not used that in a little while. So I think what's happening is that quite naturally the skills and technologies that we need are evolving over time. And what we're seeing now is that pace of change is really increasing. So the World Economic Forum's done its Future of Skills report, and it's saying that 40% of the skills that we've got currently are going to change by the time we get to 2030. It sounds mad. That sounds like a whole heap of things that we're going to have to learn that we don't know at the minute. But then I think back to those things that we learned, like Prince 2. I haven't used that in a long time. Now, much more of our software engineering is agile. So while that pace is definitely increasing, I think actually we've been quite used to this amount of change that we're having for a few years now. And in fact, that 40% number that the World Economic Forum says is going to change by 2030, it's been 40% for the last 5 years. So actually the rate itself isn't changing. I think it's just, it has increased significantly as technology is becoming more and more advanced.
Yeah. It was the 8085 processing language that I learnt at university that, surprise, surprise,
It's not part of your day-to-day life anymore?
Not part of my day-to-day life anymore. But one that is, and we'll talk about this probably a bit later, is things like SQL and Python.
Yeah.
So some of these skills are persisting for quite a long time. And I remember when I was at university and we were kind of coding in these very let's say, rudimentary environments. And now we have things like integrated development environments. You can drag and drop things. What skills do you think are most important and relevant at the moment? I mentioned SQL and Python, and one technical skill I always recommend is Python.
Yep.
Industry trend reports list things like cloud, big data, and AI as themes that are growing. But as we know, those are technologies, not skills themselves. So how do we translate that into practical skills and knowledge that people will need now and in the future?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And like, we both know how much technology and languages in particular for coding have changed. Like, I'll ask you a question back at you. Like, why did you pick Python there as your example? Like, why do you encourage people to learn Python?
Yeah, good question. It's got a really wide range of applications. And I think what's really nice about Python is that it's got a number of different libraries that you can kind of add on and build upon. And we expect that even though future technologies might change, core aspects of programming won't. So things like basic logic, object orientation, and these will be building blocks for the future and allow people to pick up new languages. So if you're learning kind of one language, then in theory, it's going to be easier to learn newer languages as they come up, because they may follow the same sort of syntax and logic.
Yeah. And you'll be happy to note that the world agrees with you.
Oh, great.
Yeah. That actually what we're looking at now is that people understand the technologies as, exactly like you said, those building blocks that they have. But the actual skills that we're seeing at the top of the lists of importance from what managers are saying they want for their leaders and their kind of upcoming talent is actually not those technical skills anymore. It's much more of these, I call them like human skills. We sometimes call them soft skills. I'm not a massive fan of that terminology. But the ability to learn quickly, to be agile, to have resilience in the workplace, to problem solve, all of those things are what fits the top of this list. And I think what that's reflecting is this need to be curious and to continue learning these technologies they come up. But to do that, you need that foundation, because you need to feel comfortable in almost like playing and tinkering with this new tech when it comes up. I think COVID was actually a really great example where we all went home and sat down and we used Zoom probably for the first time ever. Mural is now an on-running joke between us. I know that you can't have a meeting with me without a mural board to support it. So all these interactive whiteboard tools came out. We'd never used them before. They weren't a thing. And we were expected to be able to play with them and learn them like a new technology to be able to then use them in the workplace. Now, I don't know about you, but I never went on a training course of how to use Zoom, how to use Mural. I think a lot of this new tech and having that comfort in your foundations of understanding how tech works means that you can be more comfortable when new technology comes up, and then we can use it more in the workplace.
One thing that I'm noticing that has always been important, but is coming more into focus, I think, is the role of empathy, emotional intelligence. And I'm seeing that in a few ways, both as a leader and also when considering people, team management, but also as a skill to hone with emerging technology and combining that with critical analysis and critical thinking, and then using that to design and review systems.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about some of those more human-centric skills like problem solving, being able to learn new tools and techniques, being able to communicate clearly, being able to pick up new things, be resilient. All of those people skills, human skills, I think are really interesting, because the way that you learn and practice and develop those is actually quite different to how you would learn a technical skill. So I know that we've both done this. You go on a week-long course to learn a method or a tool or a technique, and at the end you get a beautiful certificate that says that you are now an expert in X. Congratulations. You can put it on your CV and feel all wonderful. And that might work with some technical skills, but with those human skills, like strategic thinking, like problem solving, like emotional intelligence, you can't just go on one course and then get a piece of paper at the end and be an expert in any of those. It takes much longer to learn those skills. And also, you need to be in the environment where you can feel able to learn them. And by learn there, I mean that you can make a mistake and get feedback and feel like your career is not going to be in jeopardy because your emotional intelligence maybe in that one meeting wasn't exactly where your company expected it to be. So there's this huge cultural aspect to making sure that companies are encouraging people to be able to develop those skills, but they can take an awful lot longer to build up. And part of that is because so much of it is kind of intrinsic in your personality. How much of that can you actually change and adjust? And I think this is where we're starting to see that slight shift in recruiting to recruiting for culture rather than what we're saying skills. And I think by skills there, we mean those technical skills because we can teach those. You can learn those as long as you want to and you're able to and you've got that kind of drive to learn those people personality skills just take a lot longer and are a bit trickier to really move in a really big way. And I think that's part of the difference that we're seeing in the two.
Yeah, totally. And I think you mentioned that they take a lot longer to learn. I think it's that learning through doing and learning through experience and then being able to reflect back on how a particular situation was and adapt based on that. And that can be really hard to do, especially, and we're all really busy. Having the time and the mental space and capacity to actually do that is really difficult.
And I think that's support, that's what's encouraged of you, and that is something that needs to happen as well. Again, that almost needs to be like a cultural level to support that reflection.
Yeah. And I think it sort of goes to what you were saying about lifelong learning, emotional curiosity, psychological safety, all of those good things. Thinking onto the more technical side of skills and thinking about some of the future technology the current technology that we now have around generative AI, ChatGPT, Copilot. How can we train our future software engineering talent when you don't need necessarily deep technical skills to produce technical output? Are there any gotchas here? What do we think about new skills and roles? Can we just use ChatGPT or Copilot to write all our code going forward?
I think this is such an interesting change, isn't it? One of the best examples I've heard of this was this shift in technology, this dramatic shift, was the invention of the calculator in mathematics.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're all aware that kids still have to learn maths in school, even though we've invented calculators that are much more accurate at any of the arithmetic that they have to do. But yet we still learn maths. And I think the same is true in computing and computer science and coding, in that, yes, there's this new tool. Yes, ChatGPT and its mates are all very good at producing code. But you have to be able to understand what it's doing. You have to have those foundation skills that we talked about to be able to understand what it's doing for you, because we all know that it makes mistakes and you won't spot those if you don't know. So the same's true of maths. You put garbage into a calculator, it's going to give you rubbish at the end, but you have to have that awareness that is actually rubbish. I mean, I had an example the other day. I spent years learning VBA. I mean, I'm an Excel wizard and it was my superpower. I don't admit to it anymore because I end up doing lots of spreadsheets for people. But I was writing a macro and I was like, I don't really have time to go in and write this. I'm going to ask my friend ChatGPT to write it for me. And it created a macro in seconds that was far beyond anything that I would have been able to write. It was commented. It had like redundancy in it. It had like errors, clauses captured. Honestly, I would have written like 5 lines and like hacked it together and hoped that it worked. And it had written me this like beautiful piece of art. But I knew that it was a beautiful piece of art because I could read it and I could understand what it was trying to do. And I think that's the shift that we're seeing. You still need to learn how to code because you still need to know how to build the syntax. You need to know what logic, how to store stuff, what's efficient, what security considerations to take into place. You might not have to type the actual words in to get the output, but you also need to be able to read it and know that it's going to work.
And to that point about knowing that it's going to work, if it's not working in the way that you expect it, being able to read the code, understand where the error might be coming from would be able to help with that. I mean, one of the things that makes me chuckle is when I see job adverts and they're asking for a particular technology. Sometimes I think there's a mismatch between employers and clients, to be fair, their expectations in terms of timelines and experience versus what's actually available in the market. So, for example, it might be that a client wants us to bring in a person with experience of a certain technology, yet that client might be years away from implementing it themselves. How can we keep ahead and keep advance of that?
Yeah, I think it's really important as a professional services firm that we are ahead, because otherwise, why are our clients coming to us in the first place? But I think in order for us to be ahead, we have to, again, question some of the assumptions that we make around how we learn and where we're accessing that learning. Because if we're just going and buying a course off the shelf to train our people with, there's nothing stopping our clients from buying exactly the same course and learning exactly the same material. And that's fine, again, for those foundations. But for that new and cutting edge, like quantum and how we want to use AI and how we want to piece it all together and some of the new security considerations coming through, I think that's where we need to consider that those traditional training courses that I think we all imagine when we say learning is actually not the only place where we learn. I think conferences are a really great example of where you can hear the most cutting edge new things. And I've been on a few great conferences in the last few years where you listen to speakers and you're like, oh my God, that's an amazing idea. Like, yeah, I can take that, I'll pinch that bit, I'll piece it together with this. It's been a very long time since I've had those moments in a training course that looks like we all imagine a training course to look. So I think conferences and even watching YouTube videos, Googling stuff, like spending more time, I think, being quite active with your learning, which I think is where we're talking about that curiosity. I think that's where we need to get more people comfortable that that's also learning and probably becoming more important, particularly for those newer skills, once you've got those foundations, to make sure that we're staying ahead of what's happening in industry.
Yeah. Absolutely. You mentioned about conferences. That's certainly something that we're seeing in my area. The consultants are getting a lot of value out of going to conferences, hearing how particular technologies are used. Maybe a vendor is teaming up with a client that they've worked with. So you're getting not just the sales pitch, if you will, but also the real world application of how they've solved that particular problem. And also just speaking with other people from the wider industry, hearing about the challenges that they've had and doing that kind of thought leadership together and thinking. And I think what's also interesting, you mentioned about YouTube videos and different ways of learning. We're also seeing online platforms. There are different ways in which that content is presented back.
Yes.
So it's about trialing out those different things and how people are learning and what suits their learning style. So, you know, it might be skills learning in terms of prompted code development. One of the things that we have within data is on our career journeys having mini projects. So you'll learn a particular skill on a particular training course, and then you're given almost like a real world application to say, here's a type of project. Can you go and solve this problem with that? And there's ways to make it more difficult if you are finding it a bit easy. So it might be something like, okay, you've done this with a structured database, now try and do it with an unstructured database and things like that.
And I think that's super important, actually, because I think we all kind of accept and acknowledge now that the world's getting more complicated. So even if you learn a skill, a thing to do in one particular area, quite often the projects that we're involved in, they're not straightforward. They're not kind of like what we call greenfield. They're not brand new things we're building anymore. We're dealing with complicated data and some systems that are very old or some that are very new, and maybe they don't talk very nicely together. So I think you're totally right. It's important that we have that context of where we're applying these skills. And that's, I think, where we start talking about competencies, isn't it? Where we're talking about the situation in which we're applying those skills and being able to do that across more complicated or complex environments, I think is becoming more essential, even at those more junior grades, to feel comfortable dealing with ambiguous situations and how you're going to cope with that.
Do we even know what job specs could look like in, say, 10 to 20 years' time? And why I asked that is because I was at a conference recently where somebody was doing a talk. They were working in the cyber threat intelligence area, and that individual was describing how the job that they are doing now, the skills that they're using now, when they were at university or they were in their learning, that job didn't exist, those skills didn't exist. So on that theme, where jobs or technologies might not even exist yet, so for example, in the space domain, or they might still be quite theoretical in terms of quantum technology, what can we do? Or is it back to that point about having that curiosity towards lifelong learning?
It can feel really unnerving, can't it? And I don't remember this being so much of a thing when we were coming out of uni and looking at careers. They all still looked like the ones that existed, I think, when our parents were kind of joining the workforce. But that's completely changed now. I look at some of the names of roles that we've got, and they didn't exist 5-10 years ago. And I think knowing that change, and we know the pace is increasing of that change as well, yes, I can completely empathise, particularly with people starting their careers, because they have no idea what that route even looks like. Now, this is where I'm going to use a very nerdy example, and Jess is much more of an outdoor being, but I like to play some computer games to take over the world. Some of them, like the strategy games, they have this concept of like a technology tree. So you'd start off like researching the wheel, and then you would research plumbing, and then, eventually when you've conquered the world, you might build a spaceship at the end. And I think if we think of our skills and maybe even roles in that framework, it might feel a little bit less unnerving, because we don't need to know about how to build a spaceship if we're just focused on learning how to build the wheel. And that's fine. But what you need to know is that your skills are going to build on each other, and they're not these just discrete blocks. You don't just learn random things and hope they fit together. You have to be aware of how you're blending your unique set of Lego bricks together on this tree. Part of that is knowing which tree branch you're even on. Like we mentioned Python earlier. Mm-hmm. So you might learn Python because you know that data analysis is actually the tree that you're on, but you're aiming at big data at the end. That might be enough for you to have some awareness of your tree. What's beyond big data, we might not know yet, but that kind of doesn't matter because it will appear once we get further down the tree. So I think that's really important to know where you are and to build those skills together. One thing to bear in mind, I think, when you're doing that is, I think we mentioned it earlier, the power of like reflection and taking a minute to look at what you have and what might be next. It can be so easy to just continue year after year, picking up a few little bits along the way, and then you have this minute where you sit and you're like, oh my God, I apparently I'm a data scientist these days. I think it's nice to have a bit more of a conscious move through that, so you're not quite so surprised if you happen to be a data scientist. To do that, you need to kind of have a reflection, a stop, a pause, have a look at what you've got. There's loads of ways you can do that. You can talk to some mentors, some managers, and there's even skills assessment tools, so you know where you are. And then they'll show you on those skills frameworks what skills are next down the road. But I think as long as we keep moving, and we keep learning and progressing and almost like rolling with the tech as it comes, we don't need to worry about spaceships unless you happen to be in our space business unit, in which case they definitely need to worry about the spaceships now.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Jo. Listeners, I'd love to hear what skills you think are going to be important in the future. Do email in at poppodcast@baesystems.com. I'm Jess Ridout, and this has been The Power of Perspective.